The family failure my sister announced at her graduation party. In a voice so sweet it could pass for love, but I knew better, I always have. At my sister's graduation party, white tablecloths, hired violinist, the whole performance, she raised a glass and toasted me like a punchline. I smiled like it didn't land, like it didn't sting, but I felt my face burn the way it does when everyone's laughing and you're the only one who knows the joke is real. 2 hours later, while I was refilling the hummus tray, someone's phone lit up, then another, and then another. That was the night everything turned. My name is Elise, I'm 31, and when this started, I was living in a walk-up above a laundromat in Echo Park, in a place so small the fridge door couldn't open all the way without bumping into my easel, and my mattress was on the floor, next to a chipped mirror that made my face look slightly warped in the morning, but I got used to it, like you get used to a rattle in your car or your name being said wrong by people who don't care to ask. I painted in that room with the windows cracked open, not for light, but because the fumes gave me headaches, and I told myself it meant I was taking it seriously. Talia, my younger sister, had just graduated from Harvard Law, summa cum something, and my mom kept saying things like, she's always been such a self-starter. Even as a baby, she refused to crawl. She just walked, as if ambition was something genetic. But selectively so, passed down like a family recipe that skipped me. She looked perfect at that party, in white silk and gold hoop earrings that caught the light every time she turned her head to greet another cousin or neighbor or retired teacher who'd come to say they weren't surprised she'd done so well. I remember standing near the buffet table, right as someone popped champagne and it hit the side of the pergola with a dull splat, and someone yelled speech. Before I even registered who they meant, and Talia stepped forward, flushed and smiling, the kind of confidence that comes from being loved publicly for so long you forget there's any other way to exist, and she raised her glass, looked right at me, and said, "To the family failure," like it was a joke, like it was some cute inside thing between us, and everyone laughed, except me, because I couldn't. I didn't say anything. I just smiled in that tight-lipped way people do when they've decided this isn't the moment to make it worse, and I walked away slowly like someone who just remembered the hummus tray was low, because it actually was, and I figured it gave me something to do with my hands. My aunt asked me if I was still doing those murals, and I nodded, even though I hadn't done a mural in 3 years, because people like to hear yes, they don't know what to do with your silence or the truth. I stood in the kitchen for most of the party, running my finger along the rim of a plastic cup, watching the way people gathered around Talia like bees to a queen who didn't sting, just shimmered, and I remember thinking, she never had to try very hard to be loved, and maybe that's what I resented, not her success, but how easily she was received. Our mother brought out a cake with her name piped in gold, and I swear I saw Dad tear up when she blew out the candles, while I sat on the folding chair near the recycling bin, pretending not to notice. Later, someone turned the music down and phones started pinging, one after another, that particular glow of screens lighting up faces in the dimming backyard, and someone, maybe it was Aunt Rachel, gasped and said, "Is this you?" as she turned her phone toward me. I looked, and there it was, a headline in all caps, "Contemporary artist's work sells at auction for $47 million, with a grainy image of one of my oil pieces, the one I painted during the heat wave, the one I almost threw away." The room didn't go quiet all at once, it rippled, like sound leaving the body in waves, first confusion, then recognition, then silence so clean it felt vacuum-sealed, and I stood there in my scuffed sandals, still holding the hummus spoon, while everyone turned toward me like they'd just realized I wasn't the extra in the background, but the one holding the match in the photograph, the one who lit the fire. Talia looked stunned, not angry, just stunned, like something had been taken from her, but she didn't know what yet. No one said anything for a long time, and I didn't either, because there was nothing I could say that wouldn't sound like I was trying to win something. I just placed the spoon down, wiped my hands on a paper napkin, and stepped outside onto the patio where the string lights buzzed quietly, like they always do when the night begins to cool and the party is no longer about the person it was supposed to celebrate. I didn't feel triumphant, just tired, the kind of tired that sits in your bones when you've held your breath too long. The day after the auction headline broke, I woke up with a dry throat and paint still under my nails, the kind that doesn't come out even after 3 showers and a sponge, and the kind you can smell in your clothes days later. My phone was on 4% from all the unread messages, most of them starting with "Wait, is this really you?" followed by some emoji people use when they don't know what to say. I didn't respond to any of them, just closed the phone and opened the window, only to find flakes of black mold blooming in the corners. The landlord was a guy named Drew who played bass in a garage band and swore every month he'd swing by, but mostly he didn't, so I started moving my canvases out of the corner and stacking them near the door, hoping they wouldn't catch spores. The heat was rising again, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes the air feel like soup, and I painted through it anyway, sweating through 2 t-shirts and using my old bedsheet as a drop cloth. That's how it was success on the internet. Mold on the ceiling, peanut butter dinners, then sleep. Talia didn't text me for 3 days, which was long for her, and when she finally did, it just said, "So that was real?" with a link to the article, the one that called me a recluse with rage in her brushstrokes, like I was some haunted genius instead of just someone with time and too many things I couldn't say out loud. I replied with a thumbs up, then turned the phone over. I didn't want to explain that it wasn't supposed to sell, that I hadn't even meant to submit it, that it felt like someone else's life now. Later that week, a woman from an art magazine emailed asking if I'd do a Q&A, just 5 questions, really casual, and I said yes before I could think too much, then panicked and stared at the questions for 2 hours. What inspires you? How would you describe your style? I didn't know how to answer without sounding fake or full of myself, so I wrote back, I paint what I can't say out loud. She replied, that's perfect. I remember laughing into my cereal because it felt like I'd tricked them, like the whole world was buying into something I barely believed. That weekend, Mom called and asked if I'd seen Talia's new apartment, sent me a link to the listing with phrases like exposed concrete and curated interiors, and I clicked through the photos slowly, one after another, white walls, minimalist decor, a balcony that caught the city light just right. I knew that place wasn't her, at least not all of her, but she'd moved in with her fiancé, the one with the expensive shoes and the slow way of talking, and it looked like something out of a lifestyle blog, clean and polished and perfectly distant. When we spoke, it was on speakerphone, her voice echoing in that new place, and she said, "So are you actually making money from this now?" Like she couldn't quite believe it, like I was still the girl who borrowed $20 for paint thinner and didn't pay it back. I said, some, and she said, well, good for you, in the tone people use when they're trying not to sound disappointed. Then she asked if I'd want to come by for dinner sometime, just casual, just us, and I said sure, even though we both knew it would never happen. My world stayed the same, mostly, still filled with old brushes and milk crates, chipped mugs with dried-up paint water, and a window that never shut properly, but there was this new thread pulling at it, this attention I hadn't asked for. And it made everything feel unstable. My inbox filled with people offering exposure instead of payment, strangers wanting a quick chat or a collab, and every time I saw those words, I closed the laptop again. I kept painting though, because that was the only part that made sense, even when nothing else did. Then one morning, an envelope slid under my door, no stamp, no return address, just a name in block letters, M. Langford. Inside was a check and a note written in neat handwriting that said, commission for 3 pieces. Timeline flexible. Pay up front. I stared at the name, my stomach twisting, because Langford wasn't just a client, he was Talia's fiancé, and I hadn't spoken a word to him since that party. I didn't call her. I didn't ask questions. I just turned the envelope over again and again and thought about what kind of man commissions secrets. I didn't say anything to Talia about the envelope, just emailed the address listed on the check and wrote, received. Will begin soon, short enough to be polite, vague enough to avoid meaning anything. The reply came fast, just 1 sentence, thank you, I trust your instincts, and I stared at it longer than I should have, wondering what kind of instincts he thought I had and what exactly he wanted me to paint. I didn't ask for references, didn't ask for context, just pulled 3 blank canvases from the closet and set them up in a triangle around me. The first painting came fast, the kind of fast that feels like your hands aren't yours, just vessels for something pushing through, and I didn't think as I mixed the red with the white, then pulled charcoal across the edges to give it that shadowed bleed. I painted a woman sitting at a table with no legs, a room made of glass, hair pulled back so tight her expression didn't move, and I knew what it was even before I stepped back. This was about Talia, not intentionally, not maliciously, just what came out when I wasn't trying to edit anything. I sent a photo of the finished piece to the email, thinking it might be too much, too personal, but the reply came quickly again. That's exactly what I wanted, and I didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know if he saw it or just thought it was abstract. The second painting was colder, more architectural, a skyline bleeding into a living room, a couch that looked untouched, 2 wine glasses filled but not clinking, and I realized I was painting a relationship, not a person, maybe not even theirs. Just one that felt like it could crack under the weight of pretending. Somewhere between the second and third piece, a journalist reached out through my website, said she was writing a piece about emerging voices in contemporary art, and wanted to feature me, said someone had tipped her off anonymously. I almost ignored it, almost closed the tab, but I wrote back and said, only if I can review quotes before they go live, and she agreed without hesitation. When we spoke, she asked more about my work than my life, which I appreciated, but near the end she said, "Is it true you're self-taught?" And I said, self-raised too. The article dropped 3 days later, longer than I expected, with a headline that made my stomach turn: The Recluse of Echo Park, Rage, Restraint, and Real Estate Paintings. It wasn't all bad. She wrote about the mold, the solitude, the way my work felt like someone whispering a secret that might set a house on fire, and I read the whole thing twice, sitting on the floor with the laptop balanced on my knees. My mom forwarded it to the family group chat with a string of exclamation marks, and Talia didn't say anything, but I saw that she'd read it. That weekend, my phone rang while I was at the art supply store, and it was Talia, her voice quieter than usual, like someone trying not to wake someone else in the next room. She said, "I read the article," and I said, "Yeah," and we stood in that silence where you both know you're circling something but haven't named it. Then she asked, "Did Mark reach out to you?" And I said, "About what?" And she paused too long before saying, "I don't know, he's just been weird lately, like distracted." I told her I hadn't heard anything. That was true mostly. When I started the third painting, I wasn't thinking about either of them, just about how silence looks when it's heavy, how light bends differently in rooms where things go unsaid, and the final canvas came out dark, navy and bone, with shapes of doors that didn't open and hands that hovered but never touched. I finished it just before midnight, sent the photo, and didn't hear back for 2 days. When the reply finally came, it was short: "Please deliver in person. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. I stared at that line for a long time, knowing something had shifted, but unsure which direction it would fall. I showed up wearing jeans covered in dried paint, with all 3 canvases wrapped in muslin, and Mark opened the door in a t-shirt, barefoot, with an expression I couldn't place, somewhere between guilt and admiration. The condo looked different than the photos, colder somehow, and he said, "She's not here," before I even asked. He poured 2 glasses of wine, set them down between us without touching his, and said, "These are stunning," then asked if I'd ever considered showing in New York. I didn't answer, just kept looking at the paintings, wondering if he recognized the version of her I'd captured, and whether he felt seen or exposed. The auction happened faster than anyone expected. A gallery in Berlin took 2 pieces. One went viral after a critic posted it with the caption, "You can feel her not forgiving you," and by the end of that week, my inbox had more press than I could answer. The biggest surprise was the third painting, the one with the door shapes and hovering hands. It was unnamed when I submitted it, just untitled number 34, but somehow it sold for 47 million, and it felt surreal, like watching someone else win the life you accidentally created with your own grief. It made headlines before I could process what it meant, and I woke up to friends I hadn't spoken to in years forwarding links and writing things like, "Always knew you had it in you," which didn't feel true, not really, since most of them never came to my shows, and none of them ever asked how I was paying rent. My mom called 3 times in one morning just to hear the sound of my voice, and Dad asked if I needed help figuring out the money, which made me laugh harder than I expected, until I realized he wasn't joking. Talia didn't call right away, but when she did, her voice was different, like she'd swallowed something sharp, like each word had to be softened before it came out. She asked, "Did you paint that before or after you met with Mark?" And I said, before, which was technically true, since I'd started it the night before I delivered the others, though she didn't ask why he commissioned them, and I didn't offer. Then she asked, "Was that me?" And I hesitated just long enough for her to say, "Because it looks like me, Elise, it looks exactly like me." I said something soft like, "It's not literal," which wasn't a lie, but also not the whole truth, and the silence that followed was so charged I could hear the static in her breath. Then she said, "Do you know what it's like to be turned into someone else's art without your consent?" And I almost told her, yes, for most of my life, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "I didn't mean to hurt you," and she said, "You didn't hurt me, you just showed me something I can't unsee," and hung up before I could ask what that meant. The article came out the next day, a glossy profile titled "The Sister Behind the Canvas," and they'd done their homework, because somehow the journalist had found a photo of Talia from the graduation party and placed it side by side with the painting. I didn't approve that layout, didn't even know it was happening, and I stared at the screen with that quiet sickness that comes when you realize something private has been turned inside out for strangers to debate. The comments were brutal, mostly about her, not me, and I felt sick reading them, but I couldn't stop. Mark texted that night, a single sentence, "I never meant for it to become public." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The damage was already shaped and framed, hung on a wall somewhere with velvet ropes and name plaques, and there was nothing left to explain. Talia disappeared from social media the following day, deleted her accounts without a word, and Mom kept asking if we were speaking, if things were okay between you two, and I just kept saying, "It's quiet," because that was the only word that fit the space between apology and exposure. I went back to painting, slowly this time, not chasing anything, just letting the quiet return to my hands. I worked at night, with the window cracked and the fan whirring, painting things without people in them, empty chairs, walls with peeling paint, streetlights at 3 a.m. I didn't name any of them, didn't submit them anywhere, just stacked them in the corner like letters I wasn't ready to send. For the first time in years, there was no audience in my mind, only the version of me who used to paint because she needed to feel something real. The gallery wanted a follow-up, something bigger, something bolder, but I told them I wasn't ready and maybe wouldn't be for a while. I could hear their disappointment, thinly veiled behind polite phrases like, "Of course, take your time," but I didn't care. I wasn't trying to go bigger. I was trying to feel smaller again, to be inside my own life instead of watching it from the outside. People kept asking what the painting meant, but it didn't matter anymore. It had already spoken. And sometimes, speaking once is enough. I didn't hear from Talia for almost 2 months, not a single text or forwarded meme, no birthday reminder or article she thought I should read, and I stopped expecting it, stopped checking if she'd undeactivated her socials, stopped asking Mom if she'd said anything. The silence stretched so long it started to feel structural, like a wall we both leaned on from opposite sides, and I wondered if she felt it too, or if it had folded into her life the way some absences do. Unnoticed until you're standing in a room you once loved and something feels missing. When she finally reached out, it was through a voicemail, short and slightly hoarse, saying she was moving out of the apartment, said it quietly, like she hadn't told anyone else yet, and I listened to it 3 times before saving it. Unsure if she meant the condo or the relationship, unsure if I wanted to ask. I didn't call back, not right away. I waited until Sunday, then texted just one sentence, "I hope you're okay," and she replied an hour later with, "I will be," which felt like the most honest thing either of us had said in months. I went to her place once after that, just to help carry boxes, the smaller ones labeled winter stuff and don't open yet, and we didn't talk much, just moved in sync like we used to when we cleaned the garage as kids, not making eye contact, but knowing where the other would step. She looked tired, not broken, just stripped down, and when I asked if she had somewhere to go, she said, "Airbnb for now," then we'll see, and I didn't press, just nodded and passed her the next box, our hands brushing like we were both still here, somehow. That evening, we sat on the balcony surrounded by packing tape and wilted plants, watching the city turn gold in that way it only does right before it forgets you, and she said, "I hated you a little, you know," and I said, "I figured, not unkindly. Just as fact." Then she added, "But I hated him more," and something in her voice cracked on the word him, not loud, just enough that I understood there were whole stories beneath what she'd said, things she hadn't shared with anyone, maybe even with herself. And I didn't ask for details, I just listened. She handed me something before I left, an old sketchbook of mine she'd taken from Mom's house years ago, said she used to flip through it when she missed me, and I didn't know whether to feel flattered or exposed. Inside were pages of half-formed ideas, doodles I'd forgotten, notes like, "She'll never say it, but she knows," and "Paint the silence, not the noise," and I held it in both hands like it was a version of me I'd abandoned, one she'd quietly protected, without ever telling me. I thanked her, and she nodded like that was enough. After that night, we didn't fall back into daily conversations, didn't start calling each other every week, but we stopped being strangers. Sometimes she sends photos, quiet ones, a bench in a park, a coffee mug with chipped gold, her shoes kicked off beside a folded blanket. And I never ask what they mean, I just respond with things like, "This looks like you," or "I remember that color," and she always hearts the message, nothing more. Like we're building something new without speaking it aloud, like forgiveness is happening sideways, through images instead of explanations. I moved out of Echo Park eventually, found a place with better light and fewer stairs, still small, still simple, but mine in a way that felt deliberate, like I'd chosen it from a place of stillness, not survival. I painted less, slower, more privately, with no audience in mind, and the galleries kept asking for new work, but I gave them timelines I didn't stick to, told them I was taking time to explore internally, which felt like the truest thing I'd said to a stranger in years. Sometimes art becomes a mirror, and sometimes you need to turn the mirror away. When people ask what happened with the painting, I just smile now, not deflecting, just resting in the fact that some things are bigger than a headline. Talia never asked for the original, and I never offered, but once, she sent me a photo of a blank wall in her new place, just a caption that said, "Still figuring out what goes here," and I stared at it for a long time, heart caught in my throat, thinking about all the things we don't say but carry anyway. Some walls need silence. Some sisters need space. And some stories don't end. They just keep changing shape. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of something you've lived but never said out loud, tap like so we know it found the right heart. And if you want more stories like this, quiet reckonings, unspoken truths, the ones that sit with you long after they end, subscribe. We tell them here, one confession at a time.